There is a new virus in town, and it's not fooling around. You can catch it through face-to-face contact or digitally, that is, via a human or bot. Few of us possess immunity, some are even willing hosts. And despite all that we have learned about it, this virus is proving more cunning and harder to eradicate than anyone could have expected. Misinformation isn't new, of course. Fake news was around even before the invention of the printing press. Although the first large-scale journalistic sham occurred in 1835 when the New York Sun published 6 articles announcing the discovery of life on the moon. What's different today is the speed, scope, and scale of misinformation enabled by technology. Online media has given voice to previously marginalized groups, including peddlers of untruth, and has supercharged the tools of deception at their disposal. The transmission of falsehood now spans a viral cycle in which artificial intelligence, professional trolls, and our own content sharing activities help to proliferate and amplify misleading claims. Why does this happen? According to Jason Riffler, a professor of political science at the University of Exeter, we tend to take incoming information at face value because the existence of human society is predicted on the ability of people to interact and on expectations of good faith. Moreover, myths can take on subtle, crafty forms that feign legitimacy, making them hard to expose without careful analysis or fact checks. This means that those of us too dazed by the job of living to exert an extra mental effort can easily succumb to the deception. And once a falsehood has slipped in and become encoded in memory, even weakly it can prove remarkably sticky and resistant to correction. Because memory declines with age, older people might be particularly vulnerable to misinformation that's repeated when retracted. Indeed, in a similar study with older adults, Lewandowski's team found that after 3 weeks, subjects aged over 65 ended up re-remembering most of the successfully corrected myths as facts. Again, though no backfire effects occurred, that is where the correction actually increases belief in the myth. And despite some contrary earlier evidence, researchers now believe such effects to be rare if they exist at all. And although repeated mentions of a myth can strengthen it, one repetition during correction seems safe and even desirable as it makes the myth more pliant by activating in it memory. Another reason why misinformation resists correction is repetition. Once something gets repeated often enough, sensational claims on social media, urban legends passed from one bored time waster to another, it can trick us into taking it as true merely because of its familiarity. The illusory truth effect, as it's known, suggests that the easier to process and more familiar something is, the more likely we are to believe it. Which is exactly what repeating a misleading claim does, getting it to go down smooth by strengthening the neural pathways linked to it. In 2017, Stephen Lewandowski, a cognitive scientist at the University of Bristol, and 2 colleagues from the University of Western Australia set out to investigate this possibility. They measured their test subjects' beliefs in 20 myths and 20 facts, then corrected the myths in a way that repeated them twice more. Right away, as well as 30 minutes later, the correction significantly reduced subjects' beliefs in and references to the false statements. However, after only a week, belief ratings crept back up to almost double their corrected levels. To fully grasp the pernicious nature of the misinformation virus, we need to reconsider the innocence of the host. It's easy to see ourselves as victims of deception by malicious actors. It's also tempting to think of being misinformed as something that happens to other people. Some unnamed masses, easily swayed by demagoguery and scandal. The problem is that people are sheep, one friend said to me. I've heard this sentiment echoed time and again by others. The implication always being that they and I were not like those other misinformed people. No, we were educated, had been taught to think, immune to dupery. But as it turns out, misinformation does not prey only on the ignorant. Sometimes those who seem least vulnerable to the virus can prove its keenest hosts and even handmaidens. I have wondered recently if, like school violence, misinformation is becoming part of the culture. If it persists because some of us actively partake in it and some merely stand by and allow it to continue. If that's the case, then perhaps we ought to worry less about fixing people's false beliefs and focus more on shifting those social norms that make it okay to create, spread, share, and tolerate misinformation. Palak shows one way to do this in practice. Highly visible individual action reaching critical mass. Another way could entail tighter regulation of social media platforms, and our own actions matter too. As the Scottish biologist D.R.K. Wentworth Thompson said in 1917, everything is what it is because it got that way. We are, each and every one of us, precariously perched between our complicity in the world as it is and our capacity to make it what it can be. It can get worse. Suppose the perfect message does find a person in need of disabusing and even succeeds in fixing their false beliefs. Will that person's attitude and behavior change accordingly? If you tell people that 97% of climate scientists agree about the reality of global warming, studies show that you will likely increase their perception of expert consensus on the subject. But whether this greater awareness translates into action, say support for carbon reduction policies, remain unclear. The evidence is mixed and the question has sparked substantial debate and disagreement among researchers, says James Druckmann, professor of political science at Northwestern University in Illinois. Yet, even in studies that do find one worrying demonstration of this possibility comes from the realm of vaccines. In a 2016 study, Riffler worked with the political scientist Brendan Nahan at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, testing two approaches to debunk the myth that flu vaccines actually cause the flu, a myth partly responsible for low vaccination rates and thousands of preventable deaths from seasonal influenza in the US. One subject group saw official corrective materials from the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, while another group received information about the risks of not vaccinating. They might pay attention only to sources they agree with and ignore divergent views, or they might believe congruent claims without a moment's thought, but spare no effort finding holes in incongruent statements. The brightest climate change deniers were simply better than their peers at counter-arguing evidence they didn't like. This hints at a vexing conclusion that the most knowledgeable among us can be more, not less, susceptible to misinformation if it feeds into cherished beliefs and identities. And though most available research points to a conservative bias, liberals are by no means immune.